Françoise Dorléac was born on March 21, 1942, at 11:15 p.m. in the Clinique Chiron at 53 Rue de la Tour in the chic 16th arrondissement of Paris, the first child of Maurice Dorléac and Renée Simonot, two actors whose voices would later become legendary in French dubbing. Maurice, a handsome man with sharp cheekbones and a velvet baritone, had been a fixture at the Comédie Française before the war. Renée, 20 years younger, delicate and luminous, had already dubbed Olivia de Havilland and Judy Garland. The newborn was named Françoise Paulette Louise, but from the first days everyone called her La Grande, because even at a few hours old she seemed taller, more vivid, more alive than anyone else in the room. The midwife who delivered her told Renée, "That one will burn bright and fast." A prophecy no one wrote down yet everyone remembered. Paris in 1942 was a city of shadows. The swastika flew over the Eiffel Tower, ration cards dictated every meal, and the Dorléac family lived in a small apartment on the Avenue Mozart where the windows were taped against air raids. Maurice was absent for long stretches, touring with the theater AUX Arms to entertain troops in the free zone, while Renée stayed behind with the baby, whispering lullabies in the blackout. Françoise's earliest memories were of sirens, of hiding under the dining table with her mother, of the smell of coal smoke and fear. Yet even then she laughed too loudly, asked too many questions, and tried to climb everything she could reach. When the war ended in 1945, she was 3 and already spoke in complete sentences, imitating her father's theatrical diction and her mother's soft dubbing inflections. In 1947, the family moved to a larger flat on the Rue de la Pampa, and on February 14, 1948, Catherine was born. Françoise, almost 6, took one look at the tiny red-faced sister and announced, "She's mine." From that moment the two were inseparable and utterly different. Françoise was fire, tall, restless, with huge hazel eyes and a mane of chestnut hair that refused to lie flat. Catherine was water, quiet, watchful, blonde, already able to sit still for hours. Their parents worked constantly, Maurice at the theater, Renée in the darkened studios of Joinville dubbing Snow White or Gone with the Wind. So the girls were raised by a succession of governesses and by each other. They invented games in which Françoise was always the pirate queen or the Apache chief and Catherine the loyal lieutenant who followed her into every adventure. They spoke a private language, half French, half invented, and when they fought they did so spectacularly, only to fall asleep hours later tangled together like kittens. School bored Françoise. She attended the Cours Hadamar, then the Lycée Victor Duruy, but spent most classes staring out the window or drawing horses in the margins of her notebooks. At 14 she decided she wanted to be an actress, not because her parents were actors, she claimed that made her want the opposite, but because she had seen Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday and understood, with the brutal clarity of adolescence, that beauty and freedom could be the same thing. She enrolled in the Conservatoire National d'Art Dramatique in 1959, lying about her age, she was only 17. The jury included Jean-Paul Belmondo, then a young teacher, who later remembered her reading from Phèdre as if the words had been written for her alone. She won the premier Prix de Comédie Moderne unanimously. By 1960 she had already appeared on television and landed her first film role in Les Loup's Dans la Bergerie, a modest thriller directed by Hervé Bromberger. She was 18, luminous, and impossible to look away from. The camera adored her the way it rarely adores anyone. Every angle, every light, every flicker of emotion registered with heartbreaking precision. She signed with agent Olga Horstig, who immediately changed the spelling of her surname to Dorléac, one accent instead of two, because it looked better on a marquee. Offers poured in. She turned most of them down. She wanted to work only with directors who frightened her a little. In 1961 she played a small but unforgettable role in Ce soir au jamais, directed by Michel Deville, opposite Anna Karina. The two became friends instantly. Karina later said Françoise was the only person she ever met who could outdazzle her without trying. The same year she appeared in La Gamberge and in Tout l'Or du Monde with Bourvil and Philippe Noiret. Critics began to notice. Paris Match ran a 5-page spread titled La Nouvelle BB. But Françoise laughed at the comparison. "Bridget is a miracle," she said. "I'm just a girl who refuses to sit still." 1963 was the year everything accelerated. She starred in Arsène Lupin contre Arsène Lupin, then in L'Homme de Rio opposite Jean-Paul Belmondo. The film, a breathless adventure spoof directed by Philippe de Broca, turned her into an international star overnight. She spent weeks in Brazil, leaping from airplanes, driving jeeps through the jungle, kissing Belmondo under waterfalls while the crew sweltered. She loved every second. She sent postcards to Catherine saying, "I have never been so happy in my life." Off-screen, she and Belmondo flirted outrageously. He called her Ma Grande Fall. But it never became serious. They were too alike, too restless, too afraid of being caged. Roman Polanski saw home to Rio and immediately cast her in Cul-de-sac, but scheduling conflicts forced her to decline. Instead, in 1964, she accepted François Truffaut's offer to play the air hostess Nicole in La Peau d'Ours. Truffaut fell quietly in love with her during filming. She treated him with affectionate mockery, calling him Mon Petit Genie Triste. The film premiered at Cannes out of competition, and the ovation lasted 12 minutes. Critics wrote that she had the most heartbreaking smile since Garbo. She read the reviews, shrugged, and flew to London to begin work on a musical. The musical was Where Are You, Polly Magoo? William Klein's savage satire of the fashion world. Françoise played a supermodel kidnapped by a vampire couturier. She learned to walk like a praying mantis, smoked gitanes through a foot-long holder, and delivered lines in English with a French accent so sexy it made grown men weep. During production, she lived in a tiny flat in Chelsea, went to clubs with Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull, and discovered that London paparazzi were even more ruthless than the French. She loved the danger. She told friends, "Paris wants to own me. London just wants to devour me. I prefer to be eaten." In 1965, she returned to Paris to film Genghis Khan opposite Omar Sharif, then immediately flew to Spain for Jacques Demy's Les Demoiselles de Rochefort. Demy had written the role of Solange specifically for her, the dreamy, red-headed music teacher who falls in love with an American composer. Catherine was cast as her twin sister Delphine. It was the first and only time the sisters would appear together on screen. They rehearsed for months in Rochefort-sur-Mer, dancing 8 hours a day with choreographer Norman Maine, learning to smile while their feet bled. Between takes they giggled like children, stole each other's clothes, and finished each other's sentences. George Chakiris, Gene Kelly, and Danielle Darieuse watched in awe as the two sisters moved as one organism. Michel Legrand composed Nous voyagens de ville en ville for them, and when they recorded it their voices blended so perfectly that Legrand wept in the booth. Off the set, Françoise's life was a whirlwind. She bought a white E-Type Jaguar, drove it too fast, and collected speeding tickets like love letters. She lived in a vast apartment on the Quai d'Orsay filled with modern art, books she never finished, and records by Dylan, the Beatles, and Nina Simone. She had affairs, brief, intense, always ending before anyone could get hurt. There was a rumor with Jean-Paul Belmondo, another with Pierre Grimblat, a longer one with François Truffaut that ended in tears and a promise never to speak of it again. She told Catherine, "I don't want to belong to anyone. I want to burn and disappear before they can put me in a box." 1966 brought Cul-de-sac after all, Polanski rescheduled, and she flew to the windswept island of Lindisfarne to play Teresa, the sultry, manipulative wife trapped in a crumbling castle with Donald Pleasance and Lionel Stander. The shoot was hellish. Freezing rain, 16-hour days, Polanski screaming at everyone. Françoise thrived. She and Polanski fought constantly, then laughed until dawn. She learned to speak English fluently, with a slight American twang she picked up from the crew. When the film premiered at the Berlin Festival, it won the Golden Bear, and critics called her performance a small miracle of dangerous grace. By early 1967, she was 25 and at the absolute peak. She had just finished dubbing her own voice for the English version of Les Demoiselles de Rochefort, signed to play opposite Michael Caine in Billion Dollar Brain, and accepted Truffaut's offer to star in La Marie Etate en Noir. She was on every magazine cover, invited to every party, adored by directors who saw in her the perfect blend of intelligence and reckless beauty. She told friends she felt invincible. On the morning of June 26, 1967, she woke early in her apartment on the Quai d'Orsay. She had a flight to catch at Nice Airport, Air France to London, then on to Los Angeles where Ken Russell wanted to meet her about a project. Catherine had spent the night. The sisters had talked until 4 a.m. about everything and nothing. Françoise kissed her sleeping sister on the forehead, scribbled a note. Je reviens vite, ma chérie. Ne mange pas tous les croissants. and left wearing a white linen dress and espadrilles. She picked up her rented Renault 10 at the Hertz agency on the Avenue de la Grande Armée and headed south on the Autoroute du Soleil. The day was glorious, hot and clear. Françoise drove fast, windows down, hair flying, singing along to France Gall on the radio. She stopped once near Aix-en-Provence for coffee and a pack of gitanes, flirted with the waiter, and got back on the road. At 10:45 a.m., just past the Villeneuve-Loubet exit, witnesses saw the white Renault suddenly veer across the median. Some said a tire burst, others said she reached for a cigarette and lost control. The car spun, flipped, and burst into flames on impact. Passers-by tried to pull her out, but the doors were jammed and the fire was too fierce. She was burned alive inside the wreckage. The news reached Paris an hour later. Catherine collapsed screaming in the apartment. Maurice and René were unreachable on a dubbing stage. Truffaut, informed by a journalist, locked himself in his office and refused to speak for 2 days. Polanski, in London, got drunk and punched a wall. Demy and Legrand sat in silence in the Rochefort cutting room, staring at the last reel of the sisters dancing in pastel dresses. The funeral was held on June 30th at the church of Saint-Honoré d'Eylau. Thousands lined the streets. Catherine, drugged with tranquilizers, walked like a ghost between her parents. Inside the church, Delphine Seyrig read from Saint-Exupéry, Jean-Pierre Cassel sobbed openly, and François Truffaut placed a single white rose on the coffin. Françoise was buried in the small cemetery of Saint-Port, south of Paris, beneath a stone that simply reads Françoise Dorléac 1942–1967. Les Demoiselles de Rochefort premiered 6 months later. Audiences wept when Françoise appeared on screen, radiant and immortal, dancing with her sister under a perfect blue sky. The film became a classic, but for those who knew her it remained unbearable to watch. Catherine refused to see it for 10 years. She left behind 8 feature films, 2 shorts, countless television appearances, and a handful of recordings, her smoky, amused voice singing Les Amis de la Musique, or reciting Pervert. She left no husband, no children, no diary, only fragments. A scarf Catherine still keeps, a lighter engraved with her initials, a stack of unfinished letters. Directors who never got to work with her, Goddard, Lozzi, Visconti, spoke of her for decades as the one that got away. Truffaut dedicated La Marie était en noir to her memory and cast Catherine in the role originally written for Françoise. Polanski named a character Teresa in every film he made afterward. 57 years later, people who never met her still leave flowers on the grave at Saint-Port. Her Jaguar was rebuilt by a fan and is exhibited in a museum in Lyon. Every March 21st, Catherine, who became Deneuve, lights a candle in the apartment on the Quai d'Orsay and plays their old records at full volume. She once said, "People think I became a star because of her death. The truth is I became an actress to keep her alive. Every role I play, she's there, laughing at me, daring me to be as free as she was." Françoise Dorléac lived 25 years, 3 months, and 5 days. She burns so brightly that the light still blinds those who look directly at it. She remains, forever, the girl running toward the sun in a white dress, just before the horizon caught fire.